If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought Grandma was ready to leave. She was fidgeting all over the bench. Then a boy clumped on the stage. He was about fifth grade or an overgrown fourth. His hair was parted in the middle, and he'd painted artificial freckles all over his moon face. His costume was high-topped shoes and old-time breeches held up by one suspender. "That's my nephew, everybody," Miss L.J. Wiedenback called out from the front row. He cleared his throat and began to recite. "Ain't I glad I ain't a girl, hands to wash and hair to curl, skirts a flapping round my knees, ain't I glad that that ain't me." The boy planted his fist on his pudgy hips and looked over the audience. "Grandpa says it's just a chance that I got to wearing pants. Says that when a kid is small, they puts dresses on 'em all. They that kicks and makes a noise gets promoted into boys. Them that sits and twists their curls, they just leaves them, calls them girls." He took his bow to a spatter of applause that grew. All of Miss Wiedenback's friends stood to clap, and they were joined by everybody who owed the bank money. The boy kept bowing. "That made me about half sick," Grandma remarked. At this point, we could have used an intermission, but Miss Merle Stubbs of the Ladies' Committee mounted the stage carrying a portable Victrola. She threw wide its doors and wound it. "Crank it up, Lula," somebody called out, and the crowd tittered. Miss Stubbs dropped a record on the turntable and withdrew. They'd have dimmed the lights now, but the car batteries were weakening anyway. Music from a full orchestra wailed out of the Victrola. It was a waltz. "When I grow too old to dream, I'll have you to remember." From nowhere, a couple glided onto the bandstand stage. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and seemed to be wearing a tuxedo. In his big hands he held a girl. The vision of a girl. Headlights caught the glimmer of her white gown as he twirled her in easy circles. Her graceful hand held up her flowing skirts. The crowd caught its breath. It was like a movie coming to life. The seed pearls on the girl's dress flashed pale fire. I looked again, and behind the careful makeup, below the swooped up hair, it was Mary Alice. As she turned in the waltz, a bustle came into view. I nudged Grandma hard, but she was completely caught up in the sight of Mary Alice sweeping around the stage in Grandma's own wedding gown. But who was her partner? He was dipping her almost to the floor now, though you couldn't tell who was leading who. I squinted and saw it was Ray Veach. Ray Veach, of Veach's Gas and Oil, and wearing Grandpa Dowdle's wedding suit with the cuffs let all the way down. Ray Veach, a man's man, who spent his life under cars with grease up to his elbows. Ray Veach and Mary Alice. My world tilted. Now the waltz was winding down. Ray and Mary Alice came out even with it. Still clinging to one of his big hands, she collapsed to the floor in an elegant curtsy. Her skirts fanned out in every direction. After a moment of stunned silence, the crowd was on its feet. They were getting up on their benches and clapping over their heads in applause like summer thunder. Grandma stood, patting her back hair in a satisfied way. She said, "We don't need to stay to the end." We were up way before daybreak on Saturday, while the dew was still on the roses. The road outside Grandma's house was thronged with people coming in from as far away now as Argenta and Farmer City for the parade. But we were working right up to the last minute on our float. At the stroke of 11, the parade stepped off with the high school bands of the three nearest towns with high schools. Next, in the order of procession, were 5 tractor-drawn hay frames jammed with members of the Piatt County Democratic Party. They were followed by Mr. L.J. Wiedenback in a decorated Hupmobile carrying all 4 Republicans. The Odd Fellows drum and bugle corps followed. On their heels, mounted, trotted the Anti-Horse Thief Society members, done up as old-timey bounty hunters in big hats and drooping mustaches. Then came the first float. Mrs. L.J. Wiedenbach had outdone herself, aided by a club she belonged to, the Order of the Eastern Star. Their float was a flatbed International Harvester truck banked in flowers. In a kitchen chair sat Mrs. Wiedenbach's old daddy in full Civil War blue and his decoration from the Grand Army of the Republic. He seemed to have no idea where he was. Surrounding him on the flatbed were Eastern Star ladies garbed in Grecian drapings. Mrs. L.J. Wiedenbach was there too, in a vast hoop skirt, holding her daddy upright. Above him a sign, roped in rambler roses, read, "Oldest settler in the community, born 1845, decorated veteran of the Civil War." By rights, this float should have been followed by a marching platoon from the Women's Christian Temperaments Union carrying their sign, "Strong drink is a mocker." But somehow our float cut in. It was another hay frame, this one from Cowgill's Dairy Farm. Flanking it on foot were the Cowgill brothers, who had all grown up to be good Christian men, except for Ernie, who was in jail. The horse that pulled our hay frame was the one that usually pulled the Cowgill's milk wagon. It had its work cut out for it because there was a lot happening on our float. At the front was a sweating yellow mound that had been a cow carved out of butter before the sun got to it. Nearby stood Mary Alice in her ball gown, bowing to the crowd and holding up the loving cup for first prize in the talent show. I rode up there with her, wearing Grandpa Dowdle's wedding suit because Ray wouldn't ride on a float. Beside us sat Miss Effie Wilcox on a three-legged stool. She was demonstrating the use of a Pioneer butter churn, and her eyes roamed all over the crowds beside the street. At the back of the float was a throne, though it was only the platform rocker from Grandma's front room. On a pile of pillows to give him stature sat Uncle Grady Griswold in full uniform. The sun sparkled off the tip of the sword he held aloft. He could no more raise a beard than I could, so he looked like a beaming boy. To lend him support, Grandma stood beside him, her feet planted wide. She was another Grandma, one we'd never seen before. Her costume was an enormous and complicated old-fashioned gown made out of cut velvet and fringe. Its bustle overhung the rear of the hay frame, and the front of it scooped breathtakingly low on her bosom. She topped herself with Idella Eubanks sunbonnet. Loose in her hand hung Grandpa Dowdle's 12-gauge Winchester. After all, it was an antique. Above them hung a sign, a sheet stretched between clothesline poles. It had taken me half the night to letter it. Uncle Grady Griswold, born 1832, and weaned in the Mexican War, by far the oldest settler in the community.